Businesses thrive by knowing customer insights because today's insights are tomorrow's facts. At iResearch, we live and breathe insights. And despite searching high and low, we were unable to find a customer insights podcast that answers one of the most important questions in business. Why do customers do what they do? So we launched one. Hi, I'm your host, Darshan Mehta. Today, I'd like to welcome Stephen Griffiths. He is the Director of Consumer Insights at Level 2. He leads the consumer research for Level 2 mobile app, including segmentation, journey mapping, and persona development. He is passionate to get a deep understanding of consumer behavior and helping companies design products and services that solve human needs. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
Great. Doing well. Good to be on the podcast, Darshan.
Pleasure to talk to you today. So let's just start from the beginning. Tell me about your journey and some of the aha moments that have led you to the world of consumer insights.
Yeah, I'm talking to most people in consumer insights. Most people happen to fall upon it. In my case, there was a little bit more purpose there. So I graduated in 2009 during the Great Recession, and horrible time to find a job, as you might recall. And I had the opportunity, interviewed with a lot of different companies, and had the opportunity to have some time to figure out what I wanted to do, because none of the interviews that I went through ended up turning into a job. And it actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise. So I had a couple of months where I was trying to figure out, what am I interested in? What do I want to do? And ultimately decided to, reach out to other people, sort of that external motivation to figure things out. And so, read articles online, actually called up probably couple dozen alumni from my undergraduate program to understand what they do, and really narrowed down to marketing research. And so with virtually no experience at all, I printed out business cards, Stephen Griffiths, market research analyst, even though might not have had the skills, but you got to position yourself somewhere, right? And then ended up applying to every market research job that I could find. And I wouldn't say it wasn't until probably like a year into that first job, ended up landing a job with Nielsen at Nielsen Bases. And it wasn't until about a year into that job that I started to really enjoy it and knew, this is a good fit. And so I'd say in that case, like there was definitely some aha moments in terms of putting together, the interviews I'd heard and an internship I'd had in the past, and online reviews and salary information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, putting it all together to try to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I'd say the real, insight was like testing it out and seeing if it worked or not, testing that hypothesis to see if market research was the job for me and it fit really well. And so that's sort of my story of getting into the industry.
So what was it that interested you when you were talking to your friends, and what was it your friends thought would interest you as well in market research that led you to say, I'm going to pursue market research?
Yeah, I think it's a fun mixture of a number of disciplines, a little bit of psychology. So I grew up overseas. And so just living in other places where people do things differently than we do in America, and just leads me to think, at first glance, it seems counterintuitive, maybe what other cultures and other places do. And as you learn more about it, you understand the psychology behind it. And actually in their context, makes perfect sense. And just because the context is a little different in the United States. And so, so the psychology piece was intriguing to me about insights. I've always been sort of a penchant for numbers, for like quantifying what's going on. And so the ability to quantify that was really exciting. And then I really enjoy talking to people. And so observing people, talking to people, interviewing, that is appealing as well. And then I did want to do something more in the business sector. I'd done an internship at the US Embassy before and just felt like private sector is where I wanted to be. And so all this sort of came together to realize this is something that I think would be really interesting.
It's interesting listening to you. It makes me remind me of why I got interested in as well. I think it's the psychology, understanding human behavior. And if you really think about it, what really is market research? It's structured curiosity, right? And being curious about people and things is what also attracted me as well. So we in the industry, there's a big shift away from the word research to insights, and a lot of people use the word insights. So I'm curious, how do you define insights?
Yeah, I think insights is a little broader than market research, right? So this is anything that you uncover about the marketplace, about your customer dynamic, even about business processes that maybe requires a little thought and research behind that can really help the business grow. And so I think broadening it a little bit to insights allows you to think a little more holistically. It doesn't have to be just a survey. It's not just talking to members. It could be observing things or understanding a business opportunity and connecting it to maybe latent consumer needs that can result in insights and ultimately help the business grow.
Yeah. And to me, it seems insights, you have to do deeper digging, right? You have to kind of get to that truth of that core that really is driving something. And that often goes beyond just the facts and observations. It's digging a little bit deeper.
No, it certainly is. And I think, reminds me a little bit of a lot of foundational research that companies do. I think sometimes, especially when you're in business and maybe the business doesn't understand the value of research and insights, there's a tendency to focus on tactical research and very much like, okay, so how do you help this specific ad campaign be more effective? Or how do we help this specific new product be more effective? And there's certainly research that can help with that. But I think sometimes the biggest aha moments come with some of the foundational research that's about the broader category or about your customer population in general, that maybe in the short term doesn't have a ton of like, oh, this exactly tells you what new product to launch or what advertising campaign to do or how to specifically price your products. But it's that foundational research that's this, as it says, foundation of the building you're trying to build. And so that you can easily, all the other tactical research that you do on top of that, suddenly you have a foundation. It makes a huge difference. I was working with a company once. They were a category leader. And they do some pretty foundational research every 5 years or so. And so as they were doing, so this is like in market research speak, like ANU or like attitude and usage, where you're looking at all your competitors and category usage and what you're doing there. And they're usually very expensive because you're looking at all your competitors. And coming out of it, you might not be very clear. In this case, they actually recognize that so this is cleaning supplies, that some of the devices that were used around the home had upgraded since they'd last done their 5-year foundational study. And so they really needed to change the formulation of their cleaning products in order to work well with those cleaning devices. And so it really led to some pretty foundational changes for how they formulated the products and how they marketed them, and was a huge opportunity. So it wasn't specifically like you talk to one person like, oh, I would like you to reformulate things. No, of course not. But when you understand like, wow, the ability to clean with these new devices was less effective than it was 5 years ago. And like, I wonder why that is. Oh, it's because like people are buying different things in their homes. And so we need to reformulate our products to do that. And so there's some of that. That's actually a great example of a very tactical insight that comes from foundational research. You don't always have that. But I think it's a good reminder that sometimes these really expensive studies that give you this underlying knowledge can be really powerful.
So what are 3 ways that you've uncovered aha moments and valuable insights? And maybe you can give us some examples.
Yeah, happy to. So, the 3 ways I'd say are external inspiration. The second way would be creating a body of knowledge. And the third one I'd say is this fast iteration in the real world to understand and uncover insights. When you think of external, so I remember working on the snack bar category for General Mills. And at that time, there's a lot of trends going on in the food, and there always is. But at that time specifically, there was a big high protein, low sugar. And so as we thought about like, how does that come to life and how do we think about that as a snack bar manufacturer, we looked competitively. And I specifically was like, okay, I got to understand what's happening in the external environment. And so looked in like ice cream with Halo Top ice cream, and looked in yogurt with 000 yogurts out there. So it's like low sugar and high protein kinds of offerings, and was able to put all those along with like consumer sentiment and interviews and what are people saying on social media, and sort of putting it all together to realize like, okay, what's the insight here? And we realized that this like high protein, low sugar way forward was a really viable way to go, and ultimately led the Fiber One brand to launch a sub-brand called Protein One that was really effective. Like it was hard to keep up with supply that first year it launched because it's just selling off the shelves so quickly. And it was really fun in those situations to realize that external insight allows you to get insights. A lot of times when we're working in categories in our market, if we just look at our close-in competitors, it's hard to come with something really new because there's often a lot of similarities among them. And so looking to a totally unrelated category or totally unrelated business model and bringing that in is a really good source of insight.
Were you guys also looking at what was driving that? Because I would speculate what was driving that is losing weight as well as having a quick snack before or after a workout. Was that what was driving that?
Yeah, it's super interesting. A lot of those products market themselves as sort of bodybuilding and staying in fit and muscle building, and that's certainly there. But I think we did find this subculture of people who then used a lot of those bodybuilding sort of marketed products to say, hey, I actually want to use that to manage my weight, right? Maybe I can eat this one bar, this high protein, and then not have to eat as much food, and maybe it'll keep me fuller longer. So this idea of more satiety was definitely a cue, even though the marketing was all about, athletes and, extreme sports. Most people aren't consuming it that way, but it was clearly looking for those same benefits. And so that was helpful also to communicate to the marketing and brand teams so they could say, oh, this is relevant for us because, Fiber One at the time was not a, athlete only brand. And yet it could still very clearly resonate with their members and their consumers.
Mm-hmm. You also talked about the third thing, testing hypotheses in the real world. And I think you'd mentioned at one point to me about something about a waffle store test that you had conducted. What was that about?
Yeah. So, just this idea of whenever you're doing research, there's different stages you do, right? So first you're trying to identify hypotheses, then you're testing, and then you're gathering all the research to understand, what might that look like, have a mental model of what you think is going on. And then sometimes you just got to test it in the real world. There's not enough research that can sometimes get you where you need to go. And that was the case. So I was at a different role at General Mills. They launched the Pillsbury stuffed waffle at 7-Eleven, which is a big success, super fun and exciting. So imagine like sausage, egg, and cheese inside a sweet waffle that then you can get warm out of a convenience store. It's delicious. So they launched this waffle, and the packaging for the waffle was a cardboard box, as opposed to most other things that are in like a thin paper bag or something that's easy, or foil or something like that that's in the warmer. And at first the team thought like, well, this is communicates what it is on the inside, and puts our brand name on there and stands out a bit on the shelf, so it isn't confused with all the other items there. That's good to stand out at shelf. That makes sense. And it was interesting through some other research we were doing. We walk into a store. So I basically started eating convenience store, gas station food, like for the rest of the year, because I'm just trying to immerse myself in the category, right? And so, eating sandwiches and like what's good and what's bad and what do I like, and what are stores doing in different places. And it was really fun. And then there's this one time I walked into a store and there's only a couple items in the warmer, and I looked at the stuffed waffle and it was in a cardboard box, and the others were not. And I thought like, wow, I don't know that looks very fresh. This is sitting in the warmer if it's in a cardboard box. Like, was it sent in somewhere? It doesn't cue freshness when it's in a thick cardboard box. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a consumer. And we'd heard from consumers a lot that I like the packaging, I don't like this. And that's what's tricky about Insight is everyone is telling you lots of things. And so piecing out what piece of the customer feedback is relevant versus some that maybe isn't as relevant for your business is tricky. And so in this case, we started, that's this hypothesis, like I think putting it in like a craft bag with a window in it would help it. And by the way, it's being prepared the same as other items in there. It wasn't like less fresh than anything else that was in that case. And so I was like, but it wasn't communicating. And so we thought like, okay, what else do we do? And so the hypothesis was maybe we can do a craft bag. And it's actually really difficult to find people. Like if you look at market research panels and things like that, there's not a lot of people that eat hot food regularly from gas stations that participate in marketing research panels. It is not a high incidence group. And so we said, okay, how to test this? Well, let's put it into a store and figure it out. And so worked with a cross-functional team in order to do that. So we had a small C-store chain that was able to work with us, a number of C-stores around the area. And we basically set up a test. We had the control with our current packaging. We had the new with the new packaging. We had to control a number of variables and talk to managers and make sure the waffles were shipped in the right places and all that logistical stuff. And ultimately decide, okay, which one actually sells better, and found that our hypothesis was correct, that quantitatively it sold as good or better than the boxed one. So that was a pro for the new packaging. And qualitatively, we talked to food service managers and store managers, and they also preferred the craft bag that was thin with the window on it versus the cardboard box. And so it was sort of a win across the board. And then members and consumers, I should say, who went into stores and were looking at it also had that positive feedback for the craft bags. We thought, great to make the switch. And they're often, and it actually led to 20% package savings because the craft bag actually not only was more consumer first, but was also more affordable. And so that was great to have a win-win in that situation. So once again, it's this situation where like we couldn't do enough tests to really feel confident about what we had to do, and sometimes need to go into the real world to understand what's what.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a couple of interesting things. One is you said it's sometimes hard to ferret through the noise. So what tips would you give someone to kind of get to an insight and recognize that this is actually an insight versus noise? Are there any tips you tell young, people coming into the insights world, here, this is the way you kind of do it since you've had years of experience now?
Yeah. I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, I think there's a reason why good insights professionals have a job. It's not always clear. I think there's a couple of things you can do. It's classic synthesis. So sometimes, so I ran into this at Nielsen, for instance. So we were doing new product forecasting for new products and got to work with a lot of Fortune 500 consumer goods brands. And very often it would happen where you're looking into a study and there's one number that says, oh, this is a strong idea, and another number that says, this is a bad idea. And junior researchers would come in and say, I don't know what to do. Like one number says good, one number says bad. Like, what do I do? And usually it just means gather more information. And so whether that's looking externally, okay, products that are similar to this that have launched in the market, what does that in-market data tell us? And Nielsen has access to all of that with their panel. And then you also look at trends like, okay, what are people saying to it? You look in the open-ended comments. What are people saying there? And so you look at all this kind of information. And once you synthesize that, that's what I'm mentioning earlier, sort of this body of knowledge. That's where you start to realize, okay, 2 data points doesn't make sense. But now that I have 10 different data points, qual and quant, then I say, oh, actually 7 of them suggest that it is this way. I'm going to go that way instead. And so that's why a lot of times it's, so to answer your question, I'd say gather more insights and input. And then typically looking at the quality of each of those inputs, which you believe more better. And then that'll help you make a decision of where you need to go.
But it also sounds like what you're saying is also striking a balance between quantitative and qualitative. And have you kind of figured out what that kind of balance is? I know it varies by product and industry and stuff, but I'm just curious, have you kind of said, we should usually try to strive for this kind of mix between the two?
Yeah. I mean, traditional marketing research would say, generally, you start qual first to understand some of the big themes and whys behind things. And then once you identify the key variables that you're sort of debating about, then you can do quantitative research. The reality is that there's a cycle back and forth, right? Sometimes you'll go, in the case of the stuffed waffle, for instance, where, maybe quant information says one thing and you want to have qual to understand, is there anything else that we're not understanding? I have been on projects before where, quantitatively, things look really good. But when you understand the qual behind it, you realize actually there's a reason that maybe isn't easy to measure, isn't easy to quantify. That's actually a big factor here that we should keep in mind. And so it really just depends on the situation. It's not like one trumps the other. It's definitely hand in hand.
So why are consumer insights important for designing products and services? Oftentimes people say you really can't ask customers about how to design a product or service. But I think you would say it's actually quite important to gain insights for that as well, right?
Yeah, it's certainly important. I think a lot of times, and Apple's famous for saying this, right? That, oh, don't listen to marketing research. They would never tell you what you need to know. And in some ways, when you're thinking about frame-breaking innovation, there's some truth to that, right? Most of us are accustomed to the environment that we're in, and it's hard for us to imagine that future. We're very good at maybe giving little tweaks based on our environment, but if you want big changes, sometimes that's harder. And so certainly, to answer your question, why do you need insights? One is to get that underlying needs. And so when, Swiffer was a great example of this, right? There's an underlying need for cleaning products, and specifically something that can be very hypoallergenic and clean. And so this idea that you use your Swiffer mop and then you can take off the end and dispose of it. So it was like a big idea. And so it's this underlying, if you'd ask anybody, what kind of mop would you like? They would never articulate Swiffer, right? But if you're like, oh, I need something that goes around corners and can go under things really well and is actually like reach way under that dining room table on my hardwood floor. And so they thought, oh, well, what if we had something that was extendable? And then and I hate, it's a big pain point for mops, right? I don't know, get it into the water and rinse it off and get the bucket and all that stuff. And so I thought, oh, well, if it's disposable, then it's a lot easier too. So it's this understanding of what are the underlying needs of the need to reach, the need, easier cleanup, easier prep. And then they said, okay, well, Swiffer meets all of these needs. And it was very successful and a very fast buy-in. And in the consumer goods cleaning world, it's like held up as a case study for a lot of things because it's been so successful in meeting those underlying needs.
Yeah, I think it's true. A lot of times, maybe consumers can't tell you how to solve the problem, but they can absolutely tell you what the problem is or what they're currently doing. And then that's what it's up to you to see opportunities to maybe make that easier, better, more convenient, or even less costly. So tell me a little about your role at Level 2. You're the Director of Consumer Insights. What does that role entail?
Yeah, so at Level 2, so this is owned by UnitedHealth Group, and it's basically a diabetes care company that's within the broader context. We operate fairly independently, and it's a super interesting problem space because type 2 diabetes, right, one of the leading causes of health challenges in America today. And what's interesting about type 2 diabetes is it's primarily caused by lifestyle choices. And so talk to any doctor, the best way to work through type 2 diabetes is lifestyle changes, changing diet, changing exercise. And that can massively alleviate a lot of the symptoms of type 2 diabetes and actually get you into remission. And so that's basically the approach that Level 2 is taking, is saying, how do we help people? It's this like incredible opportunity, right? People want to get healthier. That's a big goal for them. Specifically not being on sometimes the side effects for medications for type 2 diabetes are not pleasant. And so like they want to get off their medication. They want to get healthier. Doctors want them to make the lifestyle changes to get healthier as well. Hospitals and payers and insurance companies, they don't want to shoulder the significant costs that come in as well. And so everyone is like, hey, we all want to help members make lifestyle choices, including the members themselves. How do we enable them to do that? And so that's what Level 2 is all about. So we provide a glucose monitor that people can wear. It sends 5-minute updates to their phone so they can understand what their blood sugar is. And that allows them to see, if I eat this, if I exercise here, what does that do to my blood sugar? And that alone makes a huge difference for people seeing the effect of what their choices are having on their health. Also, activity tracker, we have a mobile app. And so we have lifestyle coaches that are working with our members. So how do we give the coaching, the support, the feedback in order to make and help them make their own choices? And ultimately, every member's journey is different. And so what's so exciting about consumer insights is it's not like a one size fits all. It's, hey, for this member, maybe it's doing steps while they're watching television, and that makes a big difference for them. Maybe it's just switching out the four bowls of ice cream for like half a bowl of ice cream during lunch and then going walking afterwards. How do we make these little changes in order to better address and become healthier? And it's made a big difference. So it's super fun working on the voice of the customer and really hearing feedback from our members and incorporating it into the experience here at Level 2.
So I guess what you're saying, you try to segment the market into different personas and stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's definitely part of the work. And it's very different in the healthcare space versus consumer goods. Consumer goods is interesting. Most categories can be consumed by anyone. If you think of granola bar, you think of laundry detergent, like pretty much like your household penetration is like 90+%, right? For a lot of these things. And so it's interesting. And so segmenting is a little more nuanced, right? Like, is the person who buys it once a month like really that different than someone who buys it twice a month? Like, and you can do it on demographics and there's certain things you can look at, but it's a lot much more nuanced, that segmentation, versus in healthcare, it's literally like, a person who's on this type of medication really does have different health needs and approaches than someone who maybe isn't diabetic at all or someone who's pre-diabetic. And so understanding those different nuances makes it a lot easier, and the needs are much clearer in terms of creating personas and creating segments.
Yeah, because I think you have an interesting challenge. You're not only designing products, but you're also designing communication, because even if people want to have better health, it's actually getting to actually make lifestyle changes. And that's where the challenge is, right? Is how do you actually communicate that? And I guess in order to do that, you really have to find different segments that are open to different types of messaging. Can you give me an example of maybe 2 different segments and how you do different messaging to them, just to get an idea?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways of cutting it, right? So there's all health-wise, right? So someone who is on a lot of diabetes medications and really working to stop that, that's a different segment. You might message things differently versus someone who maybe is on one diabetes medication, the side effects aren't that significant. So for them, the motivation to get off medication isn't the same. And so you would message differently to those groups and treat them a little bit differently based on what their needs and what they're looking for. I think the other way to segment can also be based on communication and outreach, right? So, classic example, people who will read every email you send them. So that's a segment versus people who like won't read emails. And so maybe it's just in-app notifications that makes more difference. Or some people that it's through their level 2 coach and you got to communicate stuff to the coach and they pass it on to members. And that's an easy way for it. So I think there's a lot of different ways to segment the market. But you're exactly right. Messaging is one way. The types of products and services that are offered is another way. And sort of putting that all together, that's part of the fun of creating a segmentation for a business.
Mm-hmm. I think you previously said that having an analytics mindset is crucial to succeeding in market research. Are there certain steps that you take to develop this type of mindset, or is this something you've done over the years that honed in your skills a little bit further with analytics?
Yeah, so analytics is really important. I think when you think of the steps of analytics, you're cleaning the data. So if you have like a big data set, you're going to do analysis on it or build a model for it. You're going to clean your data. You're going to have some sort of like hypothesis for what's doing what, like have a mental model. Oh, I think that this plus this is going to lead to this outcome. And so you have that mental model for it. Then you use all the data to train it. And then ultimately the big test comes when you implement it. So like, okay, does it actually work on this untested data set? Or when it's implemented into business, does it have the impact that you'd expect it to have? And so it's this analytic mindset of like hypothesis driven and then, getting outcome and then continuing to iterate on that, similar to the point about like fast iteration, I think is big. There's this lean startup book that's really focused on this like agile, fast iteration piece. And this has been a dynamic that's gone on for a long time, right? They're just articulating it well in the book. But I think that's going to have a big impact on our marketing research as well. And so, as I think back to, I worked on the cereal business at General Mills, we were trying to kind of come up with a new product. And so it was interesting within the new product development cycle, we do that over and over, where there's a hypothesis, you test it, okay, you get new ideas, make more tweaks, more hypotheses. And so through that, you test, over 100 different ideas and you narrow it down. You continue to tweak and pivot and make changes over iteration after iteration until you get to a much better idea that is viable in the marketplace. And so I think it's similar to that analytics idea of where you got to create a model, test it. Okay, try a new model, test it, try a new model, test it to really get to a model that makes sense. And it's the same thing in marketing research where you got to continue to iterate to get there. And it's super exciting. One of the products that I worked on in the cereal division, they actually launched a new brand called Plentiful. And so imagine like a really good, healthy flake that is then covered in peanut butter and not like a super sweet peanut butter, but just a little more savory, got some sweetness to it. And a nut and seed cluster. So it's really getting after this job of like something that's really tasty and delightful, but also can keep you full, which is one of the challenges with breakfast cereal today. And so it was really fun seeing that all come together. And I think it was rated like a 9 out of 10 stars from the top cereal reviewers, saying it's one of the best peanut butter cereals he's ever had. So it was like super fun to put those things together, and you get a good product at the end because you've done so much iteration to get it there. It certainly was not in the first week of ideation. Nothing was close there. But as we continue to piece it and go and iterate, that's how we were able to land.
So I think one of the things you do at level 2 is you create customer journey maps, correct? Can you maybe tell our audience what is a customer journey map and why are they important?
Yeah. So in the consumer goods world where I did a lot of my career, there's less journey mapping going on because you don't have a direct tie to some of your members. So if you think of your traditional consumer good, say I'm selling like a bathroom cleaning agent, right? Typically, I'm going to sell that to Walmart or Target, who is then going to sell it to a consumer. And so I actually don't have a lot of detailed information. I do studies and surveys on the site, so I have an idea who these are, but I don't like have a lot of information on them. And so as opposed to like a mobile app where you literally know everyone who's using a mobile app because they've downloaded the app. And so you're able, and usually they like volunteer to give, oh, here's my name and here's my email because I'm using your app. And so you have all that first party data. And so it's very different. And when you think of that first party data, suddenly this whole experience specifically with any tech products or a website or a mobile app. And that's where journey mapping is super helpful. So to answer your question of like, what does that look like? Typically you go step by step in a member process of doing a certain task and then identifying where the pain points are. So think of a typical mobile app. Okay, so they open up the app and maybe every time they're prompted to put in their password and it's hard for them to remember their password. So maybe that's a pain point, right? Then they go into the app and they set their own goals. But actually the app didn't remember the goal they set 3 months ago, just the goal they set last week. Wouldn't it be nice to have the historical view of some of the other goals they've set? It's like, okay, there's another pain point there. And then, members like really love that they're able to see, this maybe a historical chart of what they've done with some of their other progress. And that's like really exciting to them. So you have this chart that you're able to have where you look at emotions at each of the stages. And then you can also identify where the pain points are. And then that allows you as a business to then you can quantify those pain points to understand which is most important. And then you know where to go after. And then whenever you're trying to add a new element to your mobile app or a new experience, you then think, okay, where does that fit in with this part? And if someone is like, oh, we need to ask a really complicated survey right as they open the app. And like, well, we know that's a hard place because they're already stressed out about getting the password and maybe it's not easy in some other ways. So like maybe let's find a different part of the journey and where they're opening the app to serve a survey or do something else there. That just is a quick example, right? So that's the idea of journey mapping, is that you're looking at the entire experience, understanding the pain points. And so it helps you as a business understand where to focus.
Having done this for a while now, when it comes to apps, are there certain core things you say, this is really applicable, these kind of insights, or this is really applicable across many apps? Are there certain things that you've kind of learned, like these are 3 core things that are definitely important to a successful app?
Yeah. So I'd say in general, a lot of apps focus on sometimes vanity metrics. So how many daily active users did I have? How many weekly active users did I have? And some of these things that sound really impressive and you can benchmark against other mobile apps out there. And I think sometimes we miss the point that the goal of a mobile app is to add value. And so you got to think about it from the member perspective, like, okay, what value are they getting from using my app? And are they getting that value every time? And so, figuring that out, it is sometimes challenging. So Amy Bucher, so she's does a lot of work with mobile apps and specifically behavioral design. And I actually interviewed her on my podcast, episode 23, somewhere around there with Amy Bucher's insights there. But basically, she talks about that. How do we make sure that mobile apps, specifically health-focused ones, are really focused on making their lives better? Because sometimes, imagine you're a health app and you're saying, hey, I want really strong daily active users. So I'm going to send them notifications all the time and get them to come in. And you have to think about does that really make their life better? Is really checking a mobile app, it depends on the mobile app, I guess, but doesn't always need to be checked every day. And sometimes that doesn't lead to better health outcomes. And so you have to think about what is it that we're trying to measure rather than focusing on metrics that maybe look really good to investors or within the company, but don't really add value to the end user.
And how do you measure that value? How have you done it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways. Qualitatively, right, you can talk to people and get stories of what's adding value and what isn't. And that's always very eye-opening. When you have the product team on and you're talking to your members and you're like, oh, tell me what's most important. And usually there's 1, 2, or 3 simple things. And the product team's worked on, 15 things that they're hoping will all be mentioned. Of course, they're not, right? And so that's a good litmus test for what matters and what doesn't. And then obviously you can look at outcomes. So some health apps have people, add in their weight change over time or, whatever tracking measure there are. And so you can say, okay, does weight loss actually happen as they're using more of the app? And if, people use it every day and it doesn't make a difference for weight loss and that's the goal of your app, then okay, then that's a good litmus test for maybe how do we change that so we focus on the stuff that matters for that outcome.
Mm-hmm. So based on the knowledge and experience you have now, what advice or tips would you give a younger Stephen who was starting out in the pursuit of insights as a career, as you did earlier on? If you were to talk to a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself?
I'd probably say look in rather than out. I think especially early in my career, I relied a lot on those around me. So as I thought about what projects do I want to do? What's my next rotation going to be? What do I want from my next opportunity? I'd usually think inside, what does my manager say is a good idea for me to go? Or what do my coworkers say are things that I want to go to? So when I was working at Nielsen, for instance, I thought I remember, so this is a client-supplier-client relationship just out of college. And I remember being really intimidated working with client-side researchers. They seemed so seasoned and knowledgeable. And I was like, oh man, I could never do that job. And people around me, weren't client-side researchers either. They were, becoming better analysts or becoming managers of analysts at Nielsen. And so I thought, maybe that's where I want to go. And it wasn't until my wife actually is Stephen, your skill set lends itself pretty well to connecting ideas and working with cross-functional teams. And those are skill sets that might be valuable on the client side versus very detailed volume forecasting I was doing in Nielsen. Like, you can do it, but like, is that something you really enjoy doing? I was like, it's not it's not my favorite thing, I'm going to admit. And so it was really nice to have someone external like suggest I do that. And so by looking in, like, what is it that I really enjoy? Where do I want to go? And sometimes that's very different than who you're currently surrounded with. And so ultimately that allowed me to apply to an MBA program that I knew focused on consumer insights, and ultimately landed me an internship at P&G and then a job at General Mills. And that's paved a way to the client side that I find much more satisfying than I had before. And so I think I wish I would have done that a little earlier, of like, rather than look external, look inside. What do I care about? What are my values? What do I really enjoy? And really having the courage to go after that.
I think that's excellent advice. Have a little more confidence and think about what it is you really want to do. Exactly. What are some mistakes that you see businesses often make when it comes to pursuing customer insight research?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues when you're doing customer research is focusing on narrowing down the projects that are going to have the biggest impact, and being careful of statistical significance versus meaningful significance. So once again, was working on a product category, and this was a cleaning product as well. And basically, this brand was hoping to identify a new product that would appeal to this group of consumers that wasn't buying their brand currently, but would alienate their current buyers. So this is the classic trying to find incrementality, right? Oh, if I launch this product, I want only new people to buy this and not my current brand users to buy it. Every brand's been trying to do this since the dawn of time, right? For innovation. And so they literally did testing where like, okay, here's this new product and maybe it smells a little different, maybe it cleans a little bit different. And it's like, okay, we think, and every time they would statistically test it, here's our current buyers, here's our people who don't buy the brand right now. And statistically, in marketing researching, the percentages were like, oh, this is statistically different and liked more by the non-buyers than by your current brand buyers. And they do that over and over throughout the innovation process. And so they thought like, great, I have a statistically different product that is going to be great. And so they launched the product and they realized like, holy cow, our brand buyers love this thing and they're fine with it. And that's a problem because then it's a cannibalization risk of their current brand buyers. It wasn't as incremental as they were hoping. And it's a classic example of, yeah, sure. So maybe, 46% liking versus 42% liking. Maybe that's statistically different if you have a large enough sample size. But practically speaking, I mean, it doesn't matter as much, right? And so unless you're going to sell, as long as it's still sold in the same stores, the same aisle, often somewhat close to each other, you're going to be having overlap there. And so it's, I think sometimes we think a little too hopefully about research and where it can go. And you need a little bit of a practical approach to say, is this really going to make a difference in the real world? And that can help guide you in your research process.
So don't forget the big picture as well as the focus that you have on the research. Go back, take a step back, and look at the big picture. Yeah,
exactly.
What do you see on the horizon that you think is going to be impacting the way you do research moving forward and gaining customer insights?
Yeah, I think often marketing research and customer insights is a little bit siloed. And so a company will come and say, oh, help us develop a new product. And you go and do your magic and come back to us with the new product. Or come up with a great advertising campaign. And you go off and do some messaging research and come back like, here's the message you should use or here's your TV commercial, right? And so it's a little bit siloed sort of doing that. I think the future is much more integrated and iterative. So best in class companies today, sure, they would say, go off and do an advertising message, come back, they would test it. Then they would analyze, okay, what elements of this message are working? What are the best practices here? And then they would iterate, okay, how do we take out this element, and with our next iteration, make it even better. So this every single time you're measuring it and doing it better. And suddenly your customer insights isn't just like off in a room somewhere coming up with ideation, but they're really every time, okay, they're working with the marketing mix team, the marketing measurement team to understand what's working, what isn't. They're working with the sales team and understand like, okay, what can we sell onto different advertising platforms and where does that make a difference? They're working within the creatives to say, okay, that's a great idea, but how do we make sure it connects? So suddenly you're having to work cross-functionally and you're having to just iterate over time. And I think that's the future of insights rather than a siloed function.
And what area of insights would you like to delve into further and why?
Yeah, behavioral science, I think, is burgeoning and super interesting, right? So if you Google behavior change wheel, some great research came out 12, 13 years ago, but basically it was this looking all across academic research and saying, what is all the research that has to do with behavior change? And basically creates this list of like 40 or 50 different ways to change behavior, everything from, punishment to incentives to, changing the environment around you. And it's very nuanced and it has this whole map of things you can do. And I think that's sort of the holy grail of where we want to go. Because so often we get a research product that's like, your members want X or your consumers want Y. And then how do we actually help incite behavior change in order to do some of those things? And I think there's also an ethics side where it isn't just this manipulative. Because behavior science can be used for ill, right? If you look at armies or Nazi Germany, and there was a lot of behavioral science that went into those really terrible things that they were doing to incentivize behavior, right? And so how do we use it for good and to ultimately do something that your members or your consumers want to do? And then how do you, find something that meets their needs as well as has a business benefit as well?
Do you think this area is ripe for more investigation because of COVID as well? Do you think that that's really accelerated the process of people wanting change and being driven by certain changes they want?
Yeah, I think COVID from a health disease itself had some effect. I think the bigger effect is really around, just change. So I think you're probably onto something there, right? How I go to work and where I get my things done and what life is like with kids at home since daycares are closed. Like all of that has made people really push the limits of what they thought was normal and what they could do. And so I think there's a lot more interest and willingness to try new things and maybe push boundaries than there was before. And I think we've yet to see the full extent of that.
So who in the world of market insights would you love to have lunch with and why?
Yeah. So Kristen Luck, she's a pretty well-known person within the market research industry. She founded Wire, the Women in Research organization. She also used to work at Nielsen, I think set up their like online service way back when online is a brand new thing. And has also done a lot of market research. And I think what's interesting is more recently is actually she's now a investment banker. And so passed all the exams in order to get certified and is now helping like buy and sell and negotiate with in the market research space. And so I love that idea. So for me, I connect in a lot of ways. Starting up a new organization is interesting. So I'm co-founding a career community for insights professionals called the Insight Network. And so it's super fun to put that together. And it's a similar kind of thing where it's like, I'm not making money off this. It's sort of like a personal passion project along with 5 other co-founders. And so it's just helping people who are trying to find jobs and insights and how do we create a community that we can foster that and find more. So we created a website, insightscareer.org. You can go and learn more about it, but that's been really fun. So there's a lot of connection there with Kristen and Wire, Women in Research. I'm like curious to hear more about that. And then I love Kristen's perspective on always learning. Not too many people in marketing research pivot and go into investment banking, especially in late career or mid-career. And I would love to hear about her thoughts about that. I'm a big fan of lifelong learning. And so things like that, I think could be a really interesting lunch conversation.
She was actually one of my first guests, and I actually did a podcast with her, Kristen. And
I think I actually listened to it. So yeah, she did a great job.
Yeah, it was a great conversation with her. So yeah, she's definitely a good one to talk to for sure. But you may have to see her in Greece. She travels to Greece, and you may have to go there for a nice Greek meal. So, well, listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing us, your world of insights and how you pursue them. And I really appreciate it. It was fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Darshan.
Getting to AHA was brought to you by iResearch. To find out more about us, head to iResearch.com and make sure to search for Getting to AHA in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. And don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.